The galactic war had raged for centuries, tearing apart entire civilizations. Across the cold darkness of space, fleets clashed in battles that left planets in ruins and species on the edge of extinction. The Galactic Council, once a beacon of order, had become powerless against the relentless tide of destruction. Every weapon, every strategy, had been tested, and still, the war continued. Then, humanity entered the battlefield, and no one had expected much from them. The older races of the galaxy saw humans as primitive, barely worthy of interstellar travel. Their ships were smaller, their numbers fewer, their technology outdated compared to the vast armadas of the dominant empires. Yet, in the first few battles, something became clear: humans fought differently. They were unpredictable, relentless, and above all, terrifyingly creative. The turning point came when humanity unveiled a new weapon, something the galaxy had never seen before. Plasma weapons were not new. Many empires had used them for centuries, but humans had taken the concept and turned it into something far deadlier. Instead of crude energy bolts or controlled beams, they had found a way to superheat plasma to the point where it behaved like a living force, consuming everything in its path. Their ships didn't just fire weapons, they unleashed storms of liquid fire, burning through enemy shields as if they were nothing. In a single battle, humanity wiped out an entire enemy fleet. The survivors didn't flee out of strategy but out of pure terror. Stories spread faster than light, whispering of human warships that didn't just fight, they incinerated. The proudest warrior races of the galaxy suddenly hesitated before engaging a human vessel. The balance of power shifted overnight. But the war was far from over. If anything, it had just begun. Among the many species involved in the conflict, the Vortani Empire had been one of the most powerful. Their war machines had crushed countless civilizations, and their dominion stretched across hundreds of star systems. To them, humans were just another opponent to be subdued. That was, until they encountered the plasma weapons firsthand. The Battle of Havex Prime was supposed to be a decisive victory for the Vortani. Their warships numbered in the thousands, and they had surrounded a small human fleet near the asteroid belt. Victory was inevitable until the plasma weapons were unleashed. Flames licked across the darkness, moving like a living storm. Vortani ships melted under the heat, their shields failing within seconds. Metal-liquefied crews burned before they could even scream, and command stations vanished in blinding explosions. The Vortani had thought themselves invincible. Now, they realized they were preyed. One of the few survivors, an officer named Rhynak, drifted in the wreckage, his escape pod barely functioning. Through the cracked viewport, he could see what remained of his fleet: nothing but floating debris and fire. It wasn't just the destruction that haunted him. It was the way the human ships had moved, the way they had attacked without hesitation, without mercy. The Vortani had done the same to countless worlds, but now, for the first time, they understood what true fear felt like. On the human flagship, Captain Dawson watched the battlefield with cold calculation. His crew cheered, but he remained quiet. Victory was theirs, but the war was far from over. The Vortani would regroup. The other galactic powers would not sit idly by while humanity changed the very nature of warfare. The moment they revealed their plasma weapons, they had set a new rule for the galaxy: adapt or burn. And the galaxy had never feared humans more than it did now. Rhynak's breath was shallow, his mind racing as his escape pod drifted through the wreckage. The silence of space pressed against him, broken only by the faint, dying transmissions of his fleet. His hands trembled as he clutched the edge of his console, staring at the devastation around him. The Vortani Empire had ruled for centuries, conquering countless worlds with superior technology and numbers. They had crushed rebellions without effort, turning entire planets to ash when resistance grew too strong. Yet now, in a single battle, they had been reduced to nothing but debris. His comm system crackled, pulling him from his thoughts. A weak signal pushed through the static. Another survivor. Command? This is Captain Valon. Anyone still alive? Rhynak hesitated before responding. Officer Rhynak. My pod is operational, but the fleet is gone. His own voice sounded hollow, as if the words themselves refused to be real. Silence followed. Then, a bitter laugh. I saw it happen. It wasn't war. It was a massacre. Rhynak closed his eyes. He had fought in dozens of battles, seen fleets torn apart, but nothing like this. Shields had meant nothing. Hulls had melted in seconds. He had watched ships that should have withstood hours of combat fall apart in mere moments. Humanity's plasma weapons weren't just powerful, they were unnatural. No species in the galaxy had ever created something so precise, so efficient in destruction. The human fleet remained in formation beyond the wreckage, their warships untouched. They weren't pursuing the survivors. They didn't need to. The message was already sent. Captain Dawson watched the aftermath from his command seat, his expression unreadable. His crew celebrated, but he saw what came next. The Vortani weren't the only enemy. The entire Galactic Council would see this battle as a warning. Humanity had changed the balance of power overnight. Now, every empire would rush to understand their weapons, to steal them, to counter them. A young officer turned to him. Sir, incoming message from Central Command. Dawson nodded. Put it through. The screen flickered, and the face of Admiral Cole appeared. His expression was tight, his voice low. I assume you understand what you've just done, Captain. Dawson exhaled slowly. Yes, sir. Cole's eyes burned with intensity. Then you know this war has just entered a new phase. We didn't just defeat the Vortani today. We made the entire galaxy afraid of us. Dawson leaned forward. Fear can be useful. Not when it turns into desperation. Cole's voice sharpened. Every major power is going to scramble to counter our technology. The next war won't be fought with ships, it'll be fought in shadows. Assassinations, sabotage, espionage. They'll do whatever it takes to even the odds. And if they can't, they'll unite against us. Dawson remained silent. He had suspected as much. The galaxy had never welcomed humanity. They had tolerated them, underestimated them. That tolerance had just shattered. Cole continued. Return to the fleet. We need to prepare for what comes next. And Dawson. He hesitated before adding, no more surprises. The transmission ended. Dawson leaned back, his mind already calculating the next steps. The war wasn't over. It was only beginning. Far from the battlefield, deep within the heart of the Galactic Council, panic had already spread. The surviving Vortani ships limped back to their homeworld, their reports sending shockwaves through every ruling empire. Meetings were called, alliances debated, threats exchanged. None of it changed the simple truth: humanity had created something they couldn't counter. In a dimly lit chamber, representatives of the most powerful species gathered. The air was thick with tension. A large, reptilian figure spoke first, his voice low and dangerous. If we allow this to continue, we sign our own extinction. The humans have rewritten warfare. A feline-like ambassador from the Zalari Alliance narrowed her eyes. We underestimated them. We thought they were nothing more than an ambitious young race. But they have become a threat to us all. The Vortani representative, barely recovered from his injuries, leaned forward. We must act. Now. Before they gain an even greater advantage. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Yet, there was no clear path forward. Any direct attack on humanity would risk total annihilation. Their fleets were already adapting, already advancing at a pace no other species could match. Humanity had always been known for its ability to evolve under pressure. Now, they had the strongest weapon in the galaxy to fuel that evolution. A new voice cut through the discussion. There is another way. All eyes turned to a shadowed figure at the edge of the chamber. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. We cannot face them in open battle. But if we take away what makes them strong, they will fall like any other species. The Zalari ambassador narrowed her eyes. And how do you propose we do that? The figure smiled, though there was no warmth in it. We take the war to them. We do what humans do best. We adapt. We infiltrate. We learn their secrets, and then we use them against them. The room fell into silence. The idea was dangerous, but the alternative was worse. Ryanak, still drifting in his escape pod, stared at the approaching Vortani rescue ship. He had always believed in the strength of his empire, but now he understood the truth. Strength alone wasn't enough. The humans had something else, something deeper, more dangerous than their weapons. They had the ability to change the rules of war itself. And if the galaxy didn't act soon, there wouldn't be a war. There would only be the rise of humanity. The Vortani warship loomed over Rynak's escape pod, its hull scorched from battle. The docking clamps extended, locking onto his tiny vessel, pulling him into the bay with a dull metallic thud. His mind was still racing, struggling to process everything. The battle had been over for hours, but the terror still clung to him like a second skin. He wasn't the only survivor. Other officers had made it out, but no one spoke. There was nothing to say. The moment the airlock hissed open, 2 guards grabbed him by the arms, dragging him down the corridors toward the command deck. The entire ship was silent, as if the crew itself was holding its breath. Every face he passed carried the same expression: fear. Not of him, but of what they had witnessed. The nightmare of human weapons. The command deck doors slid open, revealing a war council already in session. High-ranking officers and strategists stood in tense clusters, poring over battle footage replaying on the central display. The destruction was undeniable. A deep, authoritative voice cut through the silence. "Tell me, Officer Ryanak. What did you see?" Ryanak turned toward the speaker, Admiral Zyros, the highest-ranking Vortani commander still alive. His piercing gaze demanded an answer. Ryanak swallowed hard. "It wasn't just the weapons, Admiral." His voice came out uneven, the words difficult to form. "It was how they fought. Humans don't hesitate. They don't stop. They don't negotiate. They burn everything in their path." Murmurs spread through the room. They had seen the same thing. Human plasma weapons had torn through their strongest defenses, but it wasn't just the firepower that mattered, it was the way they used it. Zyros narrowed his eyes. "You're saying their tactics are as dangerous as their technology?" Ryanak gave a hollow nod. "More dangerous. We've fought wars for centuries, but we follow patterns. Rules. Predictable strategies. Humans, they don't fight wars. They end them." Silence followed. No one argued. They had all seen it firsthand. The problem wasn't just the plasma weapons. It was humanity itself. Across the galaxy, similar meetings were taking place. The Galactic Council was in chaos. The surviving leaders of the war-torn empires sat in the Grand Chamber, but no one was speaking. Every strategy they had relied on for centuries was useless. The Battle of Havex Prime had rewritten warfare, and humanity had set the rules. Finally, a voice broke the silence. "We cannot allow this to continue." The speaker was an elder diplomat from the Zalari Alliance, his fur bristling with unease. "If humanity is allowed to perfect this technology, we will all be at their mercy." A deep voice rumbled from the opposite end of the chamber. "We are already at their mercy." It was a representative of the Zorath Dominion, a species known for their brutal military conquests. Yet even they were shaken. A holographic projection flickered to life, displaying classified intelligence reports. "The humans have already begun refining their plasma weapons," an analyst explained. Their warships are undergoing rapid modifications. They are improving at a rate we cannot match. A reptilian diplomat clenched his claws into the table. Then we must act before they become unstoppable. The murmurs grew louder. Every empire had their own ideas: sabotage, assassination, espionage, but none of them felt like enough. The problem wasn't just technology. It was human nature. Meanwhile, aboard the human flagship, Captain Dawson stood in the dimly lit war room, staring at a live feed of the galaxy's response. He had seen it coming. The Council was panicking, scrambling to unite against them. It was only a matter of time before they made their move. Admiral Cole's voice came through the secured channel. "They'll come after us, Dawson. They won't fight us head-on, not yet. They'll try to weaken us from the inside." Dawson nodded. "Then we don't wait for them to make the first move." Cole was silent for a moment before replying. "You have authorization." Dawson's grip tightened. He had spent years preparing for this war, but something about this moment felt different. Humanity had always fought with its back against the wall, but now, for the first time, they were on the offensive. The mission was clear: eliminate the Council's ability to strike first. Intelligence teams were already deployed, seeking weaknesses in their enemies' defenses. If the galaxy wanted a war in the shadows, humanity would give them one. Back on the Vortani homeworld, the final preparations were underway. A covert strike team had been assembled, elite operatives trained in infiltration and sabotage. Their mission was simple: steal the plasma weapon technology, by any means necessary. Rhynak stood among them, fully aware that failure meant extinction. He had no illusions about what was coming. If they couldn't level the playing field, the Vortani Empire would burn like the others before it.as the transport ship took off, slipping into deep space. He knew there was no turning back. The war had entered its most dangerous phase, and the galaxy's fate hung in the balance. The Vortani strike team moved through the silent corridors of their stealth vessel, each step calculated, every breath measured. They had trained for this, studied human tactics, dissected every battle they had lost, and prepared for every possible scenario. But none of that stopped the unease settling deep in Rynak's chest. The plan was simple: breach a human outpost on the edge of their controlled space, extract any data related to plasma weapon technology, and leave before anyone noticed. Simple, but not easy. Humanity's defenses had only grown stronger since the war began. Their ability to adapt was unmatched. The ship's pilot, a hardened veteran named Zelmer, kept his voice low as they approached their target. "We've entered their sensor range. Engaging stealth protocols now." The entire team braced as the ship shuddered, transitioning into silent running mode. The human outpost came into view: an unassuming research station orbiting a barren moon. No large warships, no visible defense grid. It should have been an easy target. But Rhynak knew better. Humans never left anything undefended. They launched in smaller infiltration pods, gliding toward the station's hull. Their advanced tech allowed them to bypass the station's outer sensors, slipping through the docking bay undetected. The moment they landed, they moved in formation, weapons ready, keeping their steps silent as they accessed the maintenance corridors. The first few minutes were smooth. Too smooth. Rynak's nerves were on edge as they reached the primary data core. The hacker, a wiry Vortani specialist, connected his device to the human system. His fingers danced over the controls, pulling classified files, translating human encryption. The process was fast, almost too fast. And then the alarms screamed to life. Red lights flashed through the corridors as automated security systems activated. A cold voice rang out through the station's speakers. "Unauthorized access detected. Security measures engaged." Rhynak cursed under his breath. They had walked straight into a trap. Gunfire erupted from the corridor ahead. Human soldiers, armored and armed, moved with terrifying precision, cutting down two Vortani operatives before they could react. The remaining team dove for cover, returning fire, but the humans were relentless. "We need to fall back," Zelmer shouted, dragging the wounded toward the exit. But Rhynak barely heard him. His eyes were locked onto the data core's display. The files they had accessed weren't just about plasma weapon technology. There was something else, something far worse. Humanity had already moved beyond plasma weapons. The stolen data revealed a new project, something hidden deep within human territory. A weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Rynak's hands trembled as he transferred the files to his data pad, every instinct screaming that this information was too dangerous to exist. A human soldier spotted him, raising his weapon, but before he could fire, an explosion tore through the station. The Vortani strike team had triggered the emergency fail-safes, sending the entire structure into chaos. Rhynak barely made it to the extraction point, leaping into the nearest escape pod as the station crumbled around him. The last thing he saw before the airlock sealed was a human officer watching him from across the flames. The man didn't fire, didn't call for backup. He simply stood there, as if daring Rhynak to run. And then the pod launched, hurling him into space. As the stars spun around him, he looked down at the stolen data. The galaxy had feared humanity's plasma weapons. They had no idea what was coming next. Rynak's escape pod drifted through the black void, alarms blaring as the navigation system struggled to find a safe destination. The stolen data felt like it burned in his hands. He had expected schematics, maybe prototypes of new human plasma weapons. Instead, he had found something worse. Something that changed everything. The humans weren't just refining their plasma technology. They had already surpassed it. The files contained records of an experimental energy system, something far more advanced, capable of rewriting the rules of warfare. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a force of nature. His ship's beacon finally locked onto a nearby Vortani fleet, and within minutes, tractor beams pulled his pod aboard. As the airlock hissed open, Rhynak stumbled out, still clutching the stolen data pad. His superior officers were waiting, their expressions grim as they led him to the command deck. "Tell us what you found," one of the high-ranking strategists demanded. Rhynak barely had the words to describe it. "The humans. They aren't using plasma anymore. They've created something else. Something beyond plasma, beyond kinetic weapons, beyond anything we've ever seen." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. He activated the data pad, projecting the classified human files into the air. The room fell silent as the images flickered to life, diagrams of a weapon that didn't fire traditional energy beams or physical projectiles. Instead, it manipulated matter itself, stripping energy from the environment and converting it into devastating attacks. One of the technicians gasped. This is impossible. A system like this would break the fundamental laws of physics." Rhynak shook his head. "For us, maybe. But the humans have done it." The implications were terrifying. Plasma weapons were devastating, but they had limits. This new human technology had no limits. It could drain energy from enemy ships, disrupt shield systems, even tear apart gravity itself. A fleet equipped with this kind of weapon wouldn't just win battles. They would reshape the galaxy itself. Before anyone could respond, alarms blared through the ship. The commanding officer turned sharply to his crew. "What is it?" A panicked voice came over the comms. "Incoming human vessels." They appeared out of nowhere, no hyperspace signatures detected. Rynak's blood ran cold. The humans weren't supposed to be here. Not this fast. Through the viewport, he saw them, sleek, dark warships, far smaller than expected. They didn't have the size of dreadnoughts, nor the overwhelming numbers of a battle fleet. But they didn't need those things. They had the new weapons. Without warning, the human ships fired. But there were no bright plasma beams, no missile barrages. Instead, space itself seemed to distort around the energy fields they projected. The first Vortani cruiser simply collapsed. Its shields didn't fail. Its hull didn't shatter. It just crumpled into itself, as if an unseen force had drained the very essence from its structure. Panic erupted across the command deck. Officers shouted, ordering counterattacks, evasive maneuvers, anything to stop the slaughter. But nothing worked. The Vortani weapons barely scratched the human ships. Their own shields flickered and died the moment the human energy fields reached them. Rhynak could only watch in horror as another Vortani vessel fell. Then another. The humans had already won. They had won before the battle had even begun. And then, just as suddenly as they had arrived, the human ships stopped. They didn't fire again. They didn't pursue the remaining Vortani vessels. Instead, a single message was transmitted across every frequency. Leave now. Never return. The meaning was clear. This wasn't just a battle. This was a warning. The Vortani fleet didn't hesitate. The remaining ships jumped to hyperspace, retreating to the far edges of their territory. But Rhynak knew the truth. There was no escaping this. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted forever. As he sat in stunned silence, staring at the remnants of the stolen data, a final realization hit him. The humans hadn't just built a new weapon. They had built the end of war itself. The silence on the bridge of the Vortani command ship was heavier than the vacuum of space itself. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the ship's systems, struggling to maintain stability after their disastrous retreat. Rhynak stared at the holographic display still flickering in front of him, the classified human files, the impossible weapon, the warning that had echoed across every channel. Leave now. Never return. The humans had spared them. Not out of mercy, not out of weakness, but because they didn't need to destroy them. The battle had been over before it started, and they had simply let the survivors run. That, more than anything, made the entire situation even more terrifying. The Vortani leadership convened immediately, their voices a mix of disbelief, anger, and barely concealed fear. Some wanted to strike again, to find a weakness in the humans' new technology. Others, the wiser ones, understood the truth: there would be no second chance. Another war wouldn't just be unwinnable, it would be suicide. Rhynak sat quietly as they argued, his mind replaying every moment of the battle, every piece of stolen data. He had spent his life studying human warfare, searching for patterns, for weaknesses. But this wasn't the same humanity he had studied. They had evolved, adapted, turned the very foundation of war into something new. Something untouchable. The debate stretched on for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. The Vortani would pull back, withdraw their forces, and officially end all hostilities with humanity. There was no other choice. But something still didn't sit right with Rhynak. The humans could have wiped them out completely. They could have crushed every remaining ship, eradicated their fleets, erased their entire species from the stars. And yet they didn't. Why? As the command meeting ended, he found himself staring at the data pad once more. The schematics, the energy systems, the way human ships had appeared without a trace. It all pointed to one undeniable truth: humanity had moved beyond traditional war. They had created a weapon so powerful that they didn't even need to use it. And then, for the first time, he saw something buried deep in the data, something he hadn't noticed before. A single, encrypted message hidden within the files he had stolen. It wasn't technical schematics or classified documents. It was a transmission. A message, written in simple human words. We could have ended you. But we didn't. Choose wisely. Rynak's grip tightened around the data pad. The humans had known. They had known he would escape with the stolen files. They had let him take them. And they had planted this message, waiting for him to find it. It wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. He exhaled slowly, looking out at the stars. Humanity had forced the Vortani into retreat, had shattered their military strength, had shown them a future where war no longer mattered. And yet, instead of finishing them, they had offered a choice. For centuries, the Vortani had fought, conquered, expanded through brute force. They had seen war as the only path to power. But the humans had proven that power wasn't just about destruction. True power was control. Control over when to strike, when to hold back, when to reshape the battlefield without ever firing a shot. And now, they had given the Vortani a moment of clarity. A chance to break the cycle. The war was over. Not because humanity had won, but because they had refused to play by the old rules. Rhynak knew the Vortani High Command would take time to accept this reality. Some would resist, some would refuse to believe it. But eventually, they would understand. There was no future in fighting humanity. There was only the path forward. And as he sat alone in the dimly lit command deck, he realized something else. Humanity hadn't just built the ultimate weapon. They had built a new way to rule the stars.